When the billionaire walked in and saw what his nanny was doing with his twins, everything he believed about love shattered. Nicholas Smith stood frozen in the doorway of his own home, his breath caught somewhere between shock and something he couldn't name. He had come home early, something he never did. And what he saw in that moment, in the middle of his living room floor, stopped his entire world. Angela Harris, the nanny he'd hired 3 weeks ago, was kneeling between his children. Ethan and Isabel, his 3-year-old twins, were walking. Not just walking, they were walking toward each other, their small hands reaching, their faces lit with something Nicholas hadn't seen in 3 years. Joy. And then they laughed. That sound, pure, bright, innocent, cut through Nicholas like a blade, because he had never heard it before, not once, not in all the time he'd been their father. He stood there, invisible in his own home, watching a stranger unlock something in his children that he didn't even know existed. And in that moment, Nicholas realized something that would break him completely. 3 years ago, Nicholas Smith's world ended in a hospital room. His wife, Caroline, died just hours after giving birth to their twins Ethan and Isabel, born premature, fragile, both diagnosed with Down syndrome. The doctors said, "They'll need twice the love, twice the patience," but all Nicholas heard was the silence where Caroline's heartbeat used to be. He became a father and a widower in the same breath. And the guilt. The guilt was unbearable. Every time he looked at his children, he saw her, the life that was taken to give them life, the love he had lost, the future that died with her. So he did what broken people do when the pain becomes too much. He ran. Not physically. He stayed in the same penthouse overlooking Central Park. He went through the motions, but emotionally, he disappeared. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in deals that took him everywhere except where he was needed most. Home. The penthouse became a tomb, silent, cold, empty. 13 nannies came and went. Each one left with the same words. "They're too difficult. I can't do this. This isn't what I expected." And every time, Nicholas would write a check, close the door, and tell himself it wasn't his fault. But deep down, he wondered if the problem wasn't his children. Maybe it was him. Then one November morning, a woman named Angela Harris walked through his door. She wasn't polished. She didn't promise miracles. She just looked him in the eye and said, "I can't promise they'll be easy, Mr. Smith, but I can promise I won't give up on them." Nicholas hired her out of desperation. He didn't believe her. He didn't believe anyone anymore. But 3 weeks later, on an ordinary afternoon when Nicholas came home early for the first time in years, he walked into his living room and saw something that would change everything. Angela was on the floor with his twins, and they were walking toward each other, laughing. Nicholas stood there, frozen, as the world he'd built around his grief began to crack, because in that single sacred moment, he realized something he'd been too afraid to see. Love had been here all along. He'd just been too broken to look. But now, standing in the doorway of his own life, Nicholas understood something deeper, something terrifying, something that would either destroy him or save him. He had a choice. He could keep hiding, or he could finally step through that door and learn what it really meant to be a father. But before we continue, I need you to do something. Click subscribe, like this video, and tell me where in the world are you watching from, because this story isn't just about Nicholas and his twins. It's about all of us. It's about the moments we miss because we're too afraid to stay. It's about the love we walk away from because the pain feels safer than the healing. Sometimes God doesn't fix your life all at once. He sends someone, a stranger, a quiet presence, a gentle soul who reminds you that your heart can still beat, that your life can still be beautiful. If this story touches something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let someone else believe again. Let someone else know they're not alone. Now, let me tell you how it all began. Nicholas Smith had forgotten what silence sounded like until it became the only language his home knew. The penthouse stretched 40 floors above Central Park, wrapped in glass and steel, designed to make a man feel like he'd conquered the world. But conquering the world meant nothing when you couldn't face the 2 small people living in the room down the hall. Every morning began the same way. Nicholas woke at 5:30 a.m., dressed in the dark, and left for the office before the twins stirred. He told himself it was discipline, routine, the habits of a successful man. But the truth was simpler and far more painful. He was running. 3 years, 1,095 days since Caroline died. Since the doctor had placed 2 tiny, fragile infants in his arms and said, "They'll need you now more than ever." Nicholas had looked down at Ethan and Isabel, their eyes barely open, their bodies so small they fit in the crook of one arm, and all he could think was, she's gone, and they're the reason why. He hated himself for thinking it. But he couldn't stop. The penthouse became a museum of avoidance. Rooms he didn't enter, doors he didn't open, meals he didn't share. He hired nannies one after another, hoping someone else could fill the space he refused to occupy. But they all left eventually, each one with the same exhausted resignation in their eyes. "They're too demanding, Mr. Smith. I'm not trained for this level of need. I think you need someone with more experience." Nicholas would nod, write the check, close the door, and return to his office, where spreadsheets didn't need him to feel anything, and conference calls didn't ask him to be present. By the time Ethan and Isabel turned 3, they had stopped reaching for him. They didn't cry when he walked past their rooms. They didn't look up when he stood in doorways, watching from a distance like a man observing his own life through glass. Ethan would rock gently in the corner, hands flapping when he was overwhelmed, his eyes focused on something Nicholas couldn't see. Isabel would hum a soft, repetitive sound that filled the silence, but never broke it. The developmental pediatrician had been kind but direct. "Children with Down syndrome thrive on connection, Mr. Smith. Consistency. They need to know someone is there. Not just physically, but emotionally." Nicholas had nodded, thanked her, and done nothing. Because how could he give them something he didn't have anymore? The night before Angela arrived, Nicholas stood in the hallway outside the twins' bedroom, his hand resting on the doorframe. Inside, the 13th nanny, a woman named Claire, was packing her things, her movements sharp with frustration. "I'm sorry," she said, not meeting his eyes, "but I can't do this anymore. They don't respond. They don't engage. It's like trying to reach through a wall." Nicholas watched Ethan rocking in the corner, Isabel staring blankly at the wall, and he felt something crack inside his chest. They don't smile anymore. The thought whispered through him like a ghost. Had they ever? He couldn't remember. He'd been so consumed by his own grief that he'd never stopped to notice theirs. That night, after Claire left, Nicholas sat alone in his office, the city glittering below like 1,000 tiny, unreachable stars. His laptop was open to another nanny agency website. Another round of interviews, another stranger to bring into his children's lives while he continued to hide. He was so tired. Tired of running, tired of pretending, tired of living in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. But he didn't know how to stop. So he scheduled another interview, typed out another job posting, and told himself like he had 1,000 times before that this time would be different. He didn't believe it. He didn't believe anything anymore. But the next morning, when Angela Harris walked through his door, something shifted. He didn't know it yet. But his life, the life he'd been hiding from for 3 years, was about to begin again. The morning Angela Harris walked through his door, Nicholas barely looked up from his phone. He was standing by the window, scrolling through emails, half listening to the sounds of the city waking up below. Another interview, another candidate, another person who would promise to stay and leave within a month. He'd stopped hoping weeks ago. "Mr. Smith?" Her voice was quiet, steady, not trying to impress him or fill the silence with nervous energy. Nicholas turned. The woman standing in his doorway wasn't what he expected. No tailored blazer, no leather portfolio, no polished smile practiced in front of a mirror. She wore simple scrubs, faded blue, like she'd come straight from a hospital shift, and carried a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a low bun, and her eyes were calm, clear, like she'd already seen the worst of life and decided it wasn't going to break her. "Angela Harris," she said, extending her hand. Nicholas shook it briefly. Her grip was firm, warm. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat, folding her hands in her lap, waiting. Nicholas pulled up her resume on his tablet, thin, compared to the others, A few years working with special needs children at a community center. Some volunteer work. No fancy certifications. No letters of recommendation from elite families. You don't have much experience with private care, he said, more statement than question. No, sir, Angela replied. But I have experience with children who need someone to see them. Not their diagnosis, not their limitations, just them. Nicholas looked up, caught off guard by the quiet certainty in her voice. My twins are 3 years old, he said carefully. Both have Down syndrome. They're non-verbal for the most part. They don't engage easily. The last nanny said they were, he paused, the word bitter on his tongue. Impossible. Angela didn't flinch, didn't look away. Children aren't impossible, Mr. Smith, she said softly. They're just waiting for someone who won't give up on them. The words landed harder than Nicholas expected. He cleared his throat, looking back down at the tablet. The position is Monday through Friday, 8 to 6, weekends off. I'll provide a schedule meals, therapy appointments, routines. I expect daily updates. And I need someone who can commit, long term. I can do that, Angela said. Can you? Nicholas's voice came out sharper than he intended. Because I've hired 13 people in 3 years, and none of them lasted more than a few months. Angela met his gaze, unflinching. I can't promise they'll be easy, she said, but I can promise I won't give up on them. Nicholas studied her face, searching for the crack, the hesitation, the doubt that always appeared eventually. But all he saw was calm, resolve. He didn't believe her, but he was out of options. Fine, he said, standing. You start tomorrow. I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork. Angela rose, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I won't let you down. Nicholas nodded, already turning back to his phone. He didn't walk her out, didn't ask if she had questions. He just waited until he heard the front door close, then exhaled slowly, pressing his palms against the cool glass of the window. Another nanny. Another inevitable disappointment. He told himself not to hope. Hope only made it hurt more when they left. The next morning, Nicholas left for the office, at 6, as always. By the time Angela arrived at 8, he was already in his first meeting, his mind far from the penthouse and the 2 children he'd left behind. But in his office, tucked in the corner of his desk, was something he hadn't touched in weeks. The monitor. Connected to the cameras he'd installed throughout the apartment months ago. Security, he'd told himself. Standard protocol for someone in his position. But that wasn't why he'd installed them. He'd installed them because he needed to know. Needed to see if the people he hired actually cared, or if they were just counting down the hours until their paycheck cleared. Nicholas glanced at the monitor now, his finger hovering over the power button. He told himself he wouldn't check. Told himself it didn't matter. But as the morning stretched on and his meeting droned in the background, his eyes kept drifting back to that dark screen. And finally, quietly, he pressed the button. The feed blinked to life. And Nicholas leaned forward, watching, waiting, already afraid of what he might see. Nicholas told himself the cameras were for security. Standard protocol for someone in his position. A man with his wealth, his profile, his responsibilities. It made sense to monitor what happened in his home when he wasn't there. But the truth lived deeper, in the places he didn't like to look. He was afraid. Afraid that Angela would see his children the way everyone else did, as too much work, too little reward, too far from normal. Afraid that she would smile to his face and ignore them when he wasn't watching. Afraid that she would confirm what terrified him most, that Ethan and Isabel were unlovable. And if they were unlovable, what did that make him? So he watched. Not constantly, not obsessively, just often enough. Every hour or so, between meetings, he would glance at his phone, pull up the app, check the living room feed, the kitchen, the playroom. Just a quick look, 30 seconds. A minute at most. Just to make sure. The first few days, he saw what he expected. Angela, moving through the apartment with quiet efficiency, preparing meals, cleaning up toys, sitting near the twins while they played or didn't play in their separate corners of the room. Ethan rocking, Isabel humming, both of them lost in their own worlds. Angela didn't force them to engage, didn't pull them into activities they clearly didn't want. She just existed nearby, present but not pressing. Nicholas didn't know what to make of it. By the end of the first week, something small shifted. He was in a budget meeting when he pulled up the feed, barely paying attention to the numbers being discussed on the screen in front of him. On his phone, Angela was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, a picture book open in her lap. She wasn't reading aloud. She was just turning the pages slowly, her finger tracing the illustrations, humming softly. Isabel was across the room, as usual, rocking slightly, staring at the wall. But then, so slowly, Nicholas almost missed it. Isabel turned her head, just a little, toward the sound of Angela's humming. Nicholas's breath caught. He watched Isabel's small face, the way her eyes really focused on Angela for the first time. And then, like a bird testing its wings, Isabel stood, wobbled, took one uncertain step toward Angela. Then another. Angela didn't look up, didn't react, just kept humming, turning pages, as if she'd known all along that Isabel would come. When Isabel reached her, she didn't sit. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes fixed on the colorful pictures in Angela's lap. And Angela, without a word, shifted the book so Isabel could see it better. Nicholas stared at his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Someone was speaking to him, asking him a question about quarterly projections. He had no idea what they'd said. "I'll get back to you on that," he muttered, his eyes still locked on the screen. The meeting continued around him, but Nicholas wasn't there anymore. He was watching his daughter, his silent, unreachable daughter, lean closer to a stranger and listen. By the second week, Nicholas was checking the cameras every 20 minutes. He told himself he was being cautious, responsible, but the truth was harder to swallow. He was searching for proof. Proof that Angela would fail, proof that his children were too broken, proof that he'd been right to keep his distance all along. But what he found instead was something he didn't know how to name. He saw Angela sitting with Ethan during a meltdown, not trying to stop it, not scolding him, just staying close, her hand resting lightly on his back while he rocked and cried. He saw her singing while she cooked, Isabel standing in the doorway, watching with wide, curious eyes. He saw her playing with wooden blocks on the floor, building towers and knocking them down, over and over, until Ethan finally reached out and knocked one down himself. Angela had laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. And Ethan had smiled. Nicholas had rewound that moment 3 times, his throat tight, his hands trembling. He had never seen his son smile. Not once. Not for him. One afternoon, Nicholas came home early, something he never did. He stood in the hallway, listening to the sounds drifting from the living room, soft voices, a child's giggle, the shuffle of small feet. He moved quietly to the doorway and stopped. Angela was kneeling on the floor, her arms stretched wide. Ethan was on one side of the room, Isabel on the other. "Come on, Ethan," Angela said gently. "Walk to Isabel. She's waiting for you, baby." Nicholas's breath caught in his throat. Ethan took a shaky step forward, then another. Isabel mirrored him from the other side, her tiny hands reaching. And when their fingers touched in the middle, when they tumbled into Angela's arms, laughing, Nicholas felt something inside him crack wide open. He stood there, frozen in his own doorway, tears burning his eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas Smith felt his heart beat again. Nicholas didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. The sound of his children's laughter, the way their hands had reached for each other, the light in their faces, a light he'd convinced himself didn't exist. And Angela, kneeling between them like she'd known all along what they were capable of, like she'd seen something in them he'd been too afraid to look for. The shame was suffocating. He had been 20 feet away, down the hall, behind a closed door, watching life happen on a screen instead of being part of it. And in that single moment, standing in his own doorway like a stranger, Nicholas understood something that shattered him completely. He hadn't been protecting his children by staying away. He'd been abandoning them. The next morning, he didn't leave for the office at 6. He stayed. Dressed, showered, but he stayed. He heard Angela arrive, heard her quiet greeting in the hallway, heard the twins stirring in their rooms. And instead of retreating to his office like he always did, Nicholas stood in the kitchen, gripping a cup of coffee he couldn't taste, his heart pounding like he was about to walk into battle. When Angela came in, she paused. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," she said, surprised but calm. "I didn't know you'd be home today." "I'm not staying long," Nicholas lied. "Just needed to take care of some things here." Angela nodded, moving past him to start breakfast. She didn't press, didn't ask questions, just began her routine as if he wasn't standing there, out of place in his own home. Nicholas watched her work. She moved with quiet efficiency, cracking eggs, slicing fruit, humming that same soft melody she always did. And then the twins appeared, padding into the kitchen in their pajamas, hair messy from sleep. Ethan went straight to his chair. Isabel climbed into hers, rocking slightly. Neither of them looked at Nicholas. It was like he wasn't even there. Angela set their plates in front of them, scrambled eggs, sliced strawberries, toast cut into small squares. "Good morning, babies," she said gently, brushing a hand over Isabel's hair. "Did you sleep well?" Isabel hummed in response. Ethan picked up a piece of toast, examining it closely before taking a bite. And Nicholas stood there, holding his coffee, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. "Would you like to join us, Mr. Smith?" Angela's voice was soft, but there was something in it, something that felt like an invitation and a challenge at the same time. Nicholas hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave, to retreat to his office where he was safe, where he didn't have to face the distance between him and his children, where he didn't have to feel. But he thought about yesterday, the laughter, the reaching, the moment he'd missed because he'd been hiding. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'd like that." He sat at the table, stiff, uncertain, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like a lifeline. The twins didn't acknowledge him, didn't look up. They just ate, lost in their own rhythms, while Angela moved between the counter and the table, refilling juice, wiping sticky fingers. Nicholas opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. What could he say? "I'm sorry I've been gone. I'm sorry I didn't know you could laugh. I'm sorry I've been too broken to be your father." Angela glanced at him, her expression kind but unreadable. "It takes time," she said softly, as if she could hear the thoughts screaming in his head. "They don't know you yet, but they will, if you let them." Nicholas swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Angela paused, setting down the dishcloth she'd been holding. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, Nicholas didn't try to hide. "You start by being here," she said. "Not watching, not planning, just here, present. That's where it begins." Nicholas nodded, tears burning behind his eyes. Across the table, Ethan dropped his toast. It tumbled off his plate, landing on the floor. Before Nicholas could think, before fear could stop him, he stood, picked up the toast, and handed it back to his son. Ethan took it. Their eyes met for half a second, and then Ethan looked away. But Nicholas had seen it. That flicker of recognition, that tiny, fragile bridge beginning to form. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas allowed himself to hope. Nicholas thought he'd finally found sleep when the sound woke him. Soft, distant, a melody he couldn't quite place, drifting through the penthouse like something from a dream. He blinked in the darkness, disoriented. The clock on his nightstand read 2:47 A. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it, but then he heard it again, humming. Nicholas sat up, his heart beginning to race. He threw on a shirt and stepped into the hallway, following the sound down the corridor toward the twins' rooms. Isabel's door was cracked open, a soft glow spilling into the hallway. Nicholas approached slowly, carefully, like he was stepping into someone else's life. When he looked inside, his breath stopped. Angela was sitting in the rocking chair beside Isabel's bed, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on during the day. Isabel lay in her arms, small and feverish, her face flushed and damp. A cool cloth rested on the child's forehead, and Angela was gently wiping her cheeks, humming that low, steady melody. And there, on the floor at Angela's feet, was Ethan, curled up in a nest of blankets, fast asleep, refusing to leave his sister's side. Nicholas stood frozen in the doorway, the scene before him so tender it hurt to witness. Angela glanced up, noticing him. She didn't startle, didn't apologize. She just gave him a small, tired nod. Her fever spiked around midnight, Angela whispered. I called Dr. Morrison. He said to keep her cool and comfortable. It's breaking now. She'll be okay. Nicholas's throat tightened. You stayed, he managed. Angela looked back down at Isabel, brushing a curl away from the child's damp forehead. Of course I stayed, she said softly. But your shift, Nicholas's voice cracked. You were off at 6. It's almost 3 in the morning. Angela didn't answer right away. She just kept rocking, kept humming, kept holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. They needed someone, she finally said. I couldn't leave them alone, not when they were scared. The word struck Nicholas like a blow to the chest. They needed someone, and he hadn't been there. He hadn't even known. He stood in the doorway, his hands trembling, watching this woman, this stranger he'd hired 3 weeks ago, do what he should have been doing all along. You didn't have to stay, Nicholas whispered, barely able to get the words out. Angela looked up at him then, and in her eyes he saw something that cut deeper than anger ever could. Compassion. Yes, I did, she said gently. They're not just a job, Mr. Smith. They're children who need to know that when they're hurting, someone will be there. Someone will stay. Nicholas felt his knees weaken. He braced himself against the doorframe, tears burning hot behind his eyes. I didn't know she was sick, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't hear her. I didn't. I know, Angela said quietly, but you're here now. Nicholas looked at his daughter, pale and small in Angela's arms. He looked at his son, curled protectively on the floor beside them, and he realized, with a clarity that shattered him, that this was what love looked like. Not grand gestures, not expensive gifts or carefully curated schedules. Just this. Staying. Being there when it was hard, when it was messy, when there was no applause, no recognition, no reward except the knowledge that a child wasn't alone in their fear. Angela had made that choice without hesitation. And Nicholas. He had been asleep down the hall, completely unaware that his children were suffering. Can I? His voice broke. He tried again. Can I do anything? Angela's expression softened. You can sit with Ethan, she said. I think he'd like to know his father is here. Nicholas nodded, unable to speak. He crossed the room slowly, his movements uncertain, and lowered himself to the floor beside his son. Ethan stirred slightly, his small face relaxed in sleep. Nicholas reached out, his hand hovering over Ethan's back, afraid to touch him, afraid he didn't have the right. But then he remembered Angela's words. You start by being here. So Nicholas placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder. Ethan didn't wake, but he settled deeper into sleep, as if some part of him knew. His father was finally there. Nicholas sat on that floor until dawn broke through the windows, his hand never leaving his son's back, tears streaming silently down his face. And across the room, Angela continued to rock Isabel, humming softly, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but filled with something Nicholas had forgotten existed. Grace. The kind of grace that doesn't give up. The kind that stays. 6 weeks after Angela started, guilt became heavier than fear. Nicholas had been carrying it like a stone in his chest, growing larger, sharper, impossible to ignore. Every time he looked at Angela with his children, every time he saw the trust in her eyes, the weight pressed harder. She didn't know. She didn't know he'd been watching her, studying her, recording her every move like she was a suspect instead of a savior. And the longer he waited, the worse it became. One evening, after the twins were asleep, Nicholas found Angela in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, preparing to leave for the night. Angela, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Can you stay? Just for a few minutes. I need to. I need to tell you something. She looked up, concern flickering across her face. Of course. They sat at the kitchen table, the city lights glowing softly through the windows. Nicholas's coffee sat untouched between them, growing cold. He didn't know how to start. Didn't know how to explain the fear that had driven him to violate her privacy, her trust, everything she'd given so freely. I installed cameras, he finally said, the words falling out like broken glass. Throughout the penthouse, in the living room, the playroom, the kitchen. I've been watching you, every day, since you started. Angela went still. Nicholas forced himself to continue, his hands trembling. I told myself it was for security, for the twins' safety, but that wasn't it. His voice cracked. I didn't trust you. I thought you might hurt them, or ignore them, or leave like everyone else. I thought I needed proof that you were. He couldn't finish. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Nicholas braced himself for the anger, the betrayal, the resignation letter he deserved. But when Angela finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost sad. I know. Nicholas's head snapped up. What? I know about the cameras, Angela said, meeting his eyes. I noticed them the second day. The one above the bookshelf blinks red every 30 seconds when it's recording. Nicholas felt the air leave his lungs. You knew. His voice was barely a whisper. This whole time, you knew I was spying on you, and you stayed. Angela folded her hands on the table, her expression calm but weighed with something deeper. I figured you needed to see it for yourself, she said softly. That they're worth loving, that you're capable of loving them. The words cut through Nicholas like a blade. I don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you confront me? I violated your privacy. I treated you like someone who was afraid, Angela finished gently. And you were. You are. Nicholas pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to hold himself together, but the dam was breaking. I don't know how to be their father, he choked out. I look at them and all I see is her, Caroline. Everything I lost, everything I failed to protect. The doctors said they'd need twice the love, and God, Angela, I don't even know if I have any left to give. Yes, you do, Angela said, her voice steady and sure. I've seen it, in the way you stand in doorways watching them, in the way your hands shake when you get close, in the way you torture yourself with cameras because you're so terrified of failing them again. Nicholas dropped his hands, tears streaming down his face. Then teach me, he whispered. Please, teach me how to do this. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding behind screens and closed doors. I want to be their father. I don't know how. Angela reached across the table, her hand covering his. It was the first time she'd ever touched him. You don't need lessons, Nicholas, she said, using his first name for the first time. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be there. Let them see you. Let them know you. That's where it starts. That's where love begins. A sound broke the moment, small, tentative. They both turned. Ethan stood in the doorway clutching his stuffed bear, his eyes wide and sleepy. Nicholas's heart stopped. For 3 years, he'd avoided this exact moment, being needed, being seen. But now, looking at his son standing there in the dim light, Nicholas felt something shift inside him. He stood slowly, walked toward Ethan, and knelt down. Hey, buddy, he whispered, his voice shaking. Did you have a bad dream? Ethan stared at him, uncertain. And then, so quietly Nicholas almost missed it, Ethan took a step forward. Nicholas opened his arms. And when his son fell into them small and warm and real, Nicholas held on like he was holding the only thing that mattered in the world. Because he was. The next morning began differently. Nicholas didn't wake at 5:30, didn't dress in the dark, didn't leave before the world stirred. Instead, he stood in the kitchen at 7, sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching the coffee brew, his heart beating in a rhythm he didn't recognize. Nervousness, hope, fear. When Angela arrived, she found him there, holding 2 mugs, looking like a man who'd forgotten how to belong in his own home. Good morning, she said, surprise flickering across her face. Morning, Nicholas replied. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. I thought I'd like to help today, with the twins, if that's okay. Angela set down her bag slowly, studying him. It's more than okay, she said softly. It's everything. When Ethan and Isabel shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from their eyes, Nicholas was already at the table, waiting, present. Not behind a door, not on a screen. There. Angela moved through the morning routine with quiet grace, and Nicholas followed her lead. She showed him how Ethan liked his toast cut into 4 squares, no crust. How Isabel needed her juice in the blue cup, never the red one. Small things. Details Nicholas had never known, because he'd never been close enough to learn. "Can I try?" Nicholas asked, his voice tentative as Angela prepared to feed Isabel her oatmeal. Angela handed him the spoon without hesitation. Nicholas sat beside his daughter, the spoon trembling slightly in his hand. Isabel looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. "Hey, sweetheart," Nicholas whispered, "Daddy's going to help you with breakfast today. Is that okay?" Isabel didn't answer, just watched him with those wide, curious eyes. Nicholas lifted a small spoonful of oatmeal to her lips. She turned her head away. He tried again. She pushed his hand gently, humming in protest. Nicholas felt panic rising in his chest. He was doing it wrong. "She likes it cooler," Angela said gently from across the kitchen. "Blow on it first, and let her see you taste it. She needs to trust it." Nicholas nodded, his throat tight. He blew on the oatmeal, then brought it to his own lips, tasting it. He said softly. "It's good, Isabel. I promise." He offered the spoon again. This time, Isabel leaned forward and took the bite. Nicholas exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Good girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "That's my good girl." Across the table, Ethan was watching, not eating, just watching his father with an expression Nicholas couldn't read. "You want to try too, buddy?" Nicholas asked. Ethan didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Nicholas picked up another spoon, scooped some eggs, and held it out toward his son. Ethan hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he opened his mouth. Nicholas fed him. And when Ethan chewed and swallowed, Nicholas felt something inside his chest crack wide open. Joy. Pure, overwhelming, terrifying joy. The day unfolded slowly. Angela taught Nicholas how to brush Isabel's hair without pulling, how to button Ethan's shirt when his small fingers couldn't quite manage, how to read the signs when they were overwhelmed, when they needed space, when they were ready to try something new. Nicholas fumbled through every step. He spilled juice, got the buttons wrong, read the same page of a storybook 3 times because he kept losing his place, distracted by the weight of Isabel leaning against his side. But every mistake was met with patience. From Angela. And somehow, from his children too. By afternoon, Nicholas was exhausted in a way he'd never been before. Not the exhaustion of closing deals or managing crises. This was different, deeper. The exhaustion of being present, of caring, of trying. He sat on the living room floor, blocks scattered around him, Ethan building a tower with intense concentration. Isabel hummed nearby, rocking slightly, holding a stuffed rabbit Angela had given her weeks ago. "I don't know what I'm doing," Nicholas admitted quietly, looking up at Angela. She was standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression he couldn't quite name. "Yes, you do," she said. "You're doing exactly what they need. You're here. You're trying. That's all love is, Nicholas. Showing up. Even when you're scared. Even when you don't have all the answers." Nicholas looked down at Ethan, at the careful way his son placed each block, his tongue poking out in concentration. "I've wasted so much time," Nicholas whispered. "Then don't waste any more," Angela said gently. Ethan's tower wobbled. Fell. Blocks scattered across the floor. Nicholas waited for the meltdown, the tears, the frustration. But Ethan just looked at the fallen blocks, then looked at his father, and slowly, tentatively, pushed one block toward Nicholas. An invitation. Nicholas picked up the block, his hands shaking, and placed it carefully on the floor. Ethan added another, then another, and together father and son they began to build. Not perfectly, not easily, but together. And for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas wasn't watching life happen from a distance. He was living it. Right here. In the mess and the fumbling and the beautiful, broken beginning of something real. Angela turned away from the doorway, her eyes wet with tears she didn't want them to see, because she'd just witnessed something sacred. A father coming home. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Nicholas stared at the embossed card in his hand, his brother-in-law Marcus's precise handwriting across the front. Family dinner, Saturday, 6 p.m. It's been too long. But what Marcus really meant was clear. It's time to explain yourself. Nicholas hadn't seen Caroline's family in over a year. He'd made excuses, work trips, scheduling conflicts, anything to avoid the questions in their eyes, the judgment he knew he deserved. But now, standing in his living room, watching Angela help Isabel put on her shoes while Ethan practiced counting blocks, Nicholas realized something. He wasn't the same man they remembered. And maybe it was time they knew that. "Angela," he said quietly, "would you come with us? To the dinner?" She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Smith, I don't think." "Nicholas," he corrected gently. "And I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking because you're part of this, part of us. And I don't think I can do this without you." Angela's eyes searched his face. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll come." Caroline's parents lived in a sprawling estate in Connecticut, old money, old traditions, old wounds that never quite healed. The moment Nicholas's car pulled up, he felt the weight of it, the expectations, the disappointment, the ghost of the woman he'd loved and lost. Marcus opened the door, his expression carefully neutral. "Nicholas," he said. Then his eyes shifted to Angela, standing beside the twins. "And company." "This is Angela Harris," Nicholas said, his voice steady. "She's been helping with Ethan and Isabel." "The nanny?" Marcus said flatly. "Yes, we've heard." The word landed like a stone. The nanny. As if that diminished everything she was, everything she'd done. Inside, the dining room was set with crystal and silver, every detail perfect, every surface cold. Caroline's mother, Diane, sat at the head of the table, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She looked at the twins really, looked at them for the first time in over a year. "They've grown," she whispered. "They have," Nicholas said softly, guiding Ethan and Isabel to their seats. Dinner began with strained pleasantries, questions about Nicholas's business, comments about the weather, everything except what everyone was really thinking. Until Marcus cleared his throat. "So, Nicholas," he said, his tone sharp, "we've been wondering when you'd finally bring the children around. It's been, what, 14 months since we last saw them?" Nicholas set down his fork. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have." "You should have done a lot of things," Marcus interrupted. "Caroline loved her family. She would have wanted her children to know us, to be part of—" "Don't." Nicholas's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't tell me what Caroline would have wanted. I live with that every single day." The table fell silent. Isabel began to rock slightly, overwhelmed by the tension. Angela placed a gentle hand on her back, whispering something soft that only Isabel could hear. Marcus noticed. "Is this really appropriate?" he said, looking at Angela. "Having the help at a family dinner?" And something inside, Nicholas snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Angela isn't the help," Nicholas said, his voice cutting through the silence. "She's the reason my children are thriving. She's the reason Ethan speaks now. She's the reason Isabel laughs. She stayed when 13 other people walked away. She sat up all night when Isabel had a fever. She taught me how to be a father when I'd forgotten what that meant." He looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. "For 3 years, I abandoned my children because I was drowning in grief, and not one person at this table, not one reached out to help. But Angela did. She showed up. She stayed. And if anyone here has a problem with her being at this table, then we'll leave. Because she belongs here more than anyone who's ever called my children difficult or looked at their diagnosis before seeing their hearts." The room was utterly still. Diane's hands trembled as she set down her glass. "I tried to call," she said, her voice breaking, "so many times. But you never answered. You shut us all out, Nicholas. We didn't know how to reach you." Nicholas felt the weight of her words. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I was so lost in my own pain that I couldn't see anyone else's, but I'm here now. And I'm asking if you want to know Ethan and Isabel, really know them, then I need you to see them, not their diagnosis, not what they can't do, but who they are." Diane stood slowly, tears streaming down her face. She walked around the table and knelt beside Isabel's chair. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm your grandma, and I've missed you so much." Isabel looked at her, humming softly. Then she reached out and touched Diane's face. Diane broke. She pulled Isabel into her arms, sobbing, years of grief and distance pouring out all at once. Nicholas felt Angela's hand slip into his beneath the table. He squeezed it, grateful, overwhelmed, finally free. Sunday morning arrived wrapped in golden autumn light, the kind that makes everything feel possible. Nicholas woke early, not out of habit, but anticipation. He could hear soft sounds drifting through the penthouse, Isabel's humming, Ethan's footsteps, Angela's gentle voice weaving through it all like music. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't check his email. He just got dressed and walked toward the sound of his family. When he entered the living room, Angela was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, toys arranged in a careful pattern around her. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "Morning," Nicholas replied, settling onto the floor beside her. It didn't feel strange anymore. This sitting on the floor in wrinkled clothes, hair uncombed, no agenda except being present, this felt like home. "I thought we could try something today," Angela said softly. Nicholas looked at her, curious. She positioned Ethan on one side of the room, then Isabel on the other. But this time, she didn't kneel between them. She placed Nicholas there instead. "What?" Nicholas started. "Trust me," Angela said, moving to the opposite side where Ethan had been standing. Nicholas knelt in the center, his heart pounding. Angela smiled at the twins. "Okay, babies, show Daddy what you can do." Ethan looked at Angela, then at his father, his small face serious, concentrating. "Come on, Ethan," Angela encouraged. "Go to Daddy." Ethan took one wobbling step, then another. From the other side, Isabel began moving toward Angela, her hands outstretched. But then something shifted. Ethan changed direction. He wasn't walking toward Angela anymore. He was walking toward Nicholas. Nicholas's breath caught in his throat, his vision blurring. Ethan reached him, those small, uncertain steps covering the distance between them. And when he got close enough, Ethan threw his tiny arms around Nicholas's neck and spoke. One perfect, world-shattering word. "Dada." Nicholas's world stopped. He pulled his son close, tears streaming freely down his face, his whole body shaking. "I'm here, buddy," he choked out. "Daddy's here. I'm so sorry it took me so long, but I'm here, now. I'm here." Across the room, Isabel reached Angela, grabbing onto her legs, looking up with those wide, trusting eyes. "Gigi," Isabel said clearly. Angela's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. She scooped Isabel up, holding her close, laughing and crying at the same time. Nicholas looked up at Angela through his tears, still holding Ethan, and in that moment, they both understood. This wasn't employer and employee. This wasn't caregiver and parent. This was family. Broken and rebuilt, scarred and healing, imperfect and real. Nicholas reached out his hand. Angela took it, and together, with Ethan in Nicholas's arms and Isabel in Angela's, they held each other in the streaming sunlight. "Thank you," Nicholas whispered, "for not giving up on us, for showing me what love looks like when it stays." Angela smiled through her tears. "You were always worth the wait, Nicholas, all three of you." They stayed there, wrapped in each other, while the city hummed 40 stories below, and life, real, messy, beautiful life, pulsed around them. Later that afternoon, Nicholas did something he'd been planning for days. He went through the penthouse, one room at a time, and quietly removed every camera. When Angela noticed, she didn't say anything. She just watched as he carried the last monitor to his office and tucked it away in a drawer. "You don't need them anymore?" she asked softly. Nicholas shook his head. "I spent 3 years watching life happen from behind a screen," he said. "Afraid to be part of it, afraid to feel it. But I don't want to observe anymore, Angela. I want to live. I want to be here, really here, for every moment. The hard ones and the beautiful ones, the tantrums and the triumphs. All of it." Angela's eyes shimmered. "That's what they've always needed," she said. "Not a perfect father, just a present one." That evening, as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the four of them walked through Central Park. Nicholas pushed both twins on the swings, their laughter ringing out clear and bright. Angela stood beside him, her hand brushing his, their shoulders touching. Other families played nearby, parents chasing toddlers, couples walking dogs, children shrieking with joy on the playground. And, for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas didn't feel separate from them. He was one of them. A father, flawed and learning, broken and healing, but present, finally, blessedly present. Ethan called out from the swing, "Higher, Dada!" Nicholas laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and pushed him higher. Isabel reached for Angela, singing her humming song. And Nicholas looked at the woman beside him, this quiet miracle, who'd walked into his life and reminded him what love was. "I don't know what we are anymore," he said softly. "You're not just their caregiver. You're not just—" "I don't have the right words." Angela smiled, watching the twins. "Maybe we don't need words yet," she said. "Maybe we just keep showing up, keep choosing each other, keep building this beautiful, imperfect thing together." Nicholas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I can do that," he whispered. "For them, for you, for the rest of my life I can do that." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park. And as they walked home together, hands connected, laughter echoing, hearts finally whole, Nicholas understood something profound. Love had been waiting for him all along. In 2 small faces he'd been too afraid to see. In the hands of a woman brave enough to stay. In the choice to stop running and start living. He'd spent 3 years building walls to protect himself from pain. But Angela had shown him the truth. The only way to protect your heart is to open it. And now, walking through the falling dusk with his family beside him, Nicholas finally understood. He was home. Not because of the penthouse or the city or the life he'd built, but because of them. The people who loved him even when he couldn't love himself. The people who waited. The people who stayed. And as the lights of the city began to glow against the deepening sky, Nicholas made one final promise. He would never stop showing up. Never stop choosing them. Never stop being present for every beautiful, terrifying, sacred moment of the life they were building together. Because that's what love is. Not something you find, but something you build. One moment at a time. One choice at a time. One heartbeat at a time. Forever. He paid her to clean the marble floors, not to cradle his children on them. But when he found her curled up on the cold tile, holding his twins through their nightmares like they were her own, something broke inside him. Something he didn't know was still there. Grayson Wolfe had built an empire from nothing but steel resolve, an Ivy League degree, and a complete disregard for things that couldn't be measured, like time, love, or grief. His Manhattan penthouse towered above the city like a fortress of silence, polished and sharp, just like its owner. Every morning Grayson entered the same private elevator, rode past his own name engraved in brushed silver, and stepped into a space that echoed because he didn't allow music, or laughter, or warmth. That had died 2 years ago, with his wife. He hadn't touched the nursery since. He left that to others. Downstairs, past imported Persian rugs and white-on-white decor, was a woman no one noticed. Not really. Naomi, 31, quiet, graceful in a way that didn't belong to the world she cleaned. She kept her curly hair pulled back beneath a modest black wrap, her uniform neat, and her heart, well, locked away. She had learned the hard way that feelings weren't useful. Not when you were barely scraping by, not when you were black and invisible in a world built to overlook you, not when the people you loved had a way of vanishing without warning. So she kept her head down. Until the twins. 2-year-olds Bella and Ezra Wolfe were born into privilege and tragedy. Their mother, Elise, died shortly after childbirth. Naomi had arrived when they were 6 months old, originally to clean. But it wasn't long before Naomi noticed what no one else did. That the twins didn't cry for their father. They cried for anyone who stayed. "Miss Naomi?" Bella's tiny voice had trembled from the crib one night, just weeks after Naomi started. "Yes, sweet girl," Naomi's whisper had answered from the doorway. "I scared," Bella said. Ezra had already been whimpering. The room was dim, cold. The night nanny had fallen asleep in the lounge chair with earbuds in. Naomi stepped in, just for a moment, just to soothe them. She'd meant to leave once they were asleep, but the carpet was soft, and their little hands clung to her blouse, and it had been a long time since someone wanted her close. That night she stayed. Grayson never noticed, or pretended not to. He kept his distance, even from the twins, especially from them. His assistant, Ava, often hinted that it was time to engage. "They're not just tax write-offs, Grayson," she'd joke, but he'd shut her down with a glare. He couldn't be what they needed. He was too broken, too guilty. Elise had begged him to slow down, to be home more, to hold her when the pain became unbearable. But he'd had mergers to close, boardrooms to impress. He didn't hold her enough. And now there was nothing left to hold. On a cold Thursday in November, everything shifted. Grayson had arrived home unexpectedly early after cancelling a deal last minute, a rare thing. The board thought it was strategic. In truth, he'd just felt off, restless, like something was pulling him home. He walked past the doorman, through the marble lobby, nodded at no one, and entered the penthouse. Silence. The night nanny was nowhere in sight. He made his way to the nursery, almost by instinct. He hadn't stepped foot in it since the funeral. He pushed open the door and froze. There on the floor lay Naomi, curled protectively between both cribs. Bella's tiny hand was tangled in her shirt. Ezra's cheek rested against Naomi's shoulder. A faint glow from the nightlight bathed them in gold. Naomi's eyes were closed. She wasn't pretending. She was asleep. Tears stained Bella's cheeks, but she wasn't crying anymore. Neither was Grayson, not outwardly. But something inside him had cracked so loud, he felt it echo through his ribs. If you walked in and saw someone else comforting your child better than you ever had, would you be angry, or would you feel something else? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your gut reaction matters. Grayson stood in the doorway far longer than he should have. The room was quiet now, peaceful in a way he hadn't known peace in years. The soft hum of the nightlight, the even breaths of sleeping children, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of Naomi's chest. She had wrapped herself around them like instinct, as if they were hers. As if she knew the exact rhythm to match, the perfect temperature to keep them warm, the precise silence required to ease their cries. Grayson felt like an intruder in his own home. He didn't understand the feeling rising in his throat. It wasn't rage, wasn't jealousy. It was worse. It was shame. He walked away before she woke. The next morning, Naomi stirred with a stiff neck and an aching back. She stretched quietly, careful not to wake the twins, and began folding their little blankets. As she smoothed the last one, a voice stopped her cold. "Do you always sleep in here?" Naomi turned. Grayson stood by the door, sleeves rolled, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, still polished but less put together than usual. His eyes, though, were unreadable. She straightened. "Only when—" "They need it, sir." He looked past her, to the cribs. "And how often is that?" Naomi didn't want to answer, but she wouldn't lie. Often. A long silence stretched between them. Grayson stepped inside. "I saw you last night," he said. Naomi's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wolfe. The nanny had stepped out. They were crying, and I didn't mean to—" "I'm not reprimanding you." Naomi blinked. "That was unexpected." Grayson ran a hand through his hair, frustrated, not with her, but with himself. "They don't cry with you, or if they do, you stay." She hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes. That's all children need." He looked at her then, really looked, and what he saw wasn't just a maid. It wasn't even just a woman who loved children. It was someone who stayed, something he hadn't done, not when Elise asked him to, not when it mattered most. He nodded once. "Thank you." Naomi said nothing. But in her silence, something settled between them. Later that day, Ava cornered him in his office. "You look like someone just told you your stock's tanked." Grayson didn't look up from his screen. "I'm fine." Ava narrowed her eyes. "You're wearing yesterday's tie." He sighed. "Ava, not now." She leaned against the glass wall. Okay, but can I just say one thing? That maid, Naomi, I've seen her with the twins. She's not just help, Grayson. She's something else." Grayson stayed silent. Ava softened. "They cling to her like she's gravity." That night he sat at the edge of his bed, watching the city lights blink far below. His penthouse felt colder than usual, and all he could think about was Naomi on the nursery floor, holding his children like they were her world. Naomi, meanwhile, was trying to shake off the conversation. She didn't want complications. She didn't want kindness. The last time she'd let herself care like this, she'd lost everything. Her baby girl Jordan had only lived a few months, born too early. Naomi had held her through machines and prayers, then let her go with nothing left but a hospital bill and a hollow chest. Since then, Naomi didn't cradle babies, until Bella reached for her that first night. Something had cracked open, and every moment since had felt like both healing and reopening a wound. The next evening, Grayson asked to speak with her again, in the study this time. She stood across from him, nervous. His walls were lined with law books, modern art, and ambition. It felt like standing in a courtroom. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I'm hiring a new nanny, full-time." Naomi blinked. "Yes, sir. But not to replace you." She tilted her head. Grayson finally looked up. "I want you to stay, but not just to clean. I need someone they trust." Naomi's heart thudded in her chest. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I saw the way they look at you. That's not something money can buy." Naomi searched his face for mockery, pity, power. She found none. Just a man realizing, maybe for the first time, what mattered. At this point, what do you think he should do? Follow his pride or follow his heart? Tell us in the comments. Should Grayson keep his distance or finally show up for his children? Grayson hadn't planned to sit at the breakfast table. In fact, he rarely did. Meals were something the staff prepared for the twins and the nanny, and he usually took his own in his office, or not at all. But that morning, something compelled him to walk into the kitchen, pour his own coffee and sit. It startled Naomi. She had just set down Ezra's spoon and was wiping his chin with a gentle touch when she saw the shadow at the door. Her whole body tensed like a startled deer. Grayson felt it. The stiffness. The unspoken, "What are you doing here?" He sat anyway. Ezra babbled something incoherent and reached for his bottle. Bella clapped. Naomi didn't speak. She focused on the twins, acting as though he wasn't there. It stung more than he expected. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to be more involved." Naomi looked up slowly. "With the children?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Okay." Silence again. Thick, awkward. Naomi turned her attention back to Bella, who had yogurt on her nose. Grayson stood up before finishing his coffee. He couldn't take the weight of her quiet. He'd forgotten how much silence could say. That day, Naomi kept her distance. She kept to cleaning, cooking, tending to the twins. She made sure Grayson had no reason to linger around her. Every time he entered a room, she left it. He wasn't blind to it, and it made him question if he'd done something wrong. Maybe he had crossed a line. Later, in the quiet of the nursery, Naomi talked to herself in whispers as she folded Bella's tiny clothes. "Don't be foolish, Naomi," she murmured. "This is not your home. These are not your babies. And he is not your rescue." Still, her hands trembled. She remembered the way he'd looked at her, not with dominance, but with something that terrified her even more. Respect. Grayson sat in his office that night and stared at the framed photo of Elise. Her smile used to calm him. Now, it haunted him. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. He hadn't said those words aloud in years. He could feel something changing in him, a softening he couldn't afford. Naomi wasn't just the help anymore, and that scared the hell out of him. Not because he didn't respect her, but because he did, because for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't numb. The next morning, Naomi found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. Naomi, I've arranged for the twins' doctor visit today. I'll be joining. You don't have to go, unless you want to. G. She stared at it for a long time. He was giving her a choice. She hated that she appreciated it. At 2 p.m., she found herself standing next to him in the pediatrician's waiting room. Bella was in her arms, Ezra on Grayson's lap. They sat in silence, until Grayson, softly, asked, "Were you close to your parents?" Naomi's breath caught. She didn't look at him. "My father left when I was a baby. My mother passed when I was 16. He didn't press, but something in his expression shifted, like he saw her more clearly. "And you?" she asked, surprising herself. "My parents were expectations, not people." They shared a glance, not warm, but real. After the appointment, they stepped out into the crisp fall air. The twins were asleep in their car seats. Naomi adjusted Bella's blanket, tucking it around her gently. Grayson watched her, not her hands, her. The quiet way she moved through the world, soft, sure, invisible, unless you were really looking. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable around me," he said suddenly. Naomi stood still. "I haven't done anything to make you feel—" He stopped. "I'm not used to this." "Neither am I," she said quietly. "I'm trying," he added. "I know." And with that, she turned toward the car. That night, Naomi sat at the foot of her twin-sized bed in the servants' quarters and stared at her phone screen. She hadn't called her sister in weeks, hadn't opened the box of baby clothes she kept in her closet for years. She felt like a wall was cracking, and she didn't know if it was supposed to. Meanwhile, Grayson watched the baby monitor from his study, not because he needed to, but because Naomi was in the room, and the twins were asleep with smiles on their faces, because she was there. It started with a storm. The kind that turned Manhattan sidewalks into rivers, and the sky into a constant flicker of white-blue fire. By 5 p.m., traffic was chaos, the nanny had cancelled, and Grayson stood in front of Naomi, tension in his shoulders. "She says she can't get here. Road closures." Naomi shrugged slightly. "I can stay with them, sir. It's not a problem." Grayson glanced at the clock. "And dinner?" Naomi lifted an eyebrow, a rare flicker of mischief. "You ordering in?" He sighed. "I was supposed to meet with a venture firm." She didn't say they can wait. She just said, "The twins need dinner, and comfort, not chaos." He hesitated. Then, "I'll stay." It was the first time Grayson ever chose to be fully present without being forced to. By 6:30 p.m., the twins were in the bath, giggling as Naomi pretended the washcloth was a spaceship. Grayson stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching, like he couldn't believe he was part of this moment. Ezra splashed water over the tub's edge. "Hey!" Naomi playfully scolded. "Sir Ezra, the splash master." Grayson chuckled. It slipped out before he could stop it. Naomi glanced over. "You have a nice laugh," she said simply. He froze. "I didn't mean to—" she started. "No," he cut in. "Thank you. It's just been a while." She nodded and turned back to the kids. But something changed. Softer air, shared space, shared silence. After the twins were tucked into bed, thunder cracked overhead. The city glowed through rain-soaked glass, and Grayson wandered into the kitchen. Naomi was there, barefoot, making tea. "You want some?" she offered, holding up the kettle. He nodded. They stood in silence until he said, "Did you always want to be a maid?" Naomi smiled without humor. "You don't grow up dreaming of wiping countertops." He winced. "That came out wrong." "I know what you meant," she said gently. "No, I wanted to be a teacher, early childhood education." "What happened?" Naomi hesitated, fingers tightening around her mug. "My daughter got sick. I dropped out of college to care for her. After she passed—" her voice faltered. I couldn't go back. I didn't see the point. Grayson blinked. Naomi rarely talked about herself, but the way her voice trembled, like she was speaking through a bruise, made him go still. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She nodded. She had eyes like Bella's. That hit him in the chest. "I didn't know," he whispered. "No one does. I don't tell people. It's easier that way. But you told me." Naomi met his eyes. "I don't know why." They sat across from each other at the kitchen island, steam rising between them, thunder still rumbling outside. Grayson cleared his throat. Elise loved storms. Naomi tilted her head. She used to say they made her feel less alone, like the whole world was crying with her. Naomi's breath caught. He'd never said her name before, not to Naomi. "She was sick for years," Grayson continued, "but I ignored it. I thought money could fix it. Better hospitals, private doctors." "Love's not currency," Naomi whispered. "No, but I thought it was." He looked down. "She died holding a nurse's hand, not mine." Naomi didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just reached out, slowly, and covered his hand with hers. Warmth, real, unforced. His fingers didn't pull away. Hours passed. Naomi checked the twins one more time before heading toward the hallway. "I should stay," Grayson said suddenly. She turned. "I mean, until the storm passes. You don't have to leave." Naomi hesitated. "I sleep downstairs." "You don't have to tonight." The offer hung in the air, too tender, too raw. Naomi's breath caught. "I don't want misunderstandings." He nodded. "It's not like that." She studied him, his eyes, his posture. There was no suggestion, no pressure, just a man who didn't want to be alone for once. "Okay," she said. They sat in the living room with blankets and pillows, the sound of rain beating against glass. Naomi eventually fell asleep on one end of the couch, legs curled up, breathing soft. Grayson watched her. Then, without thinking, he whispered, "You feel like home." At this point, what do you think he should do? Follow his pride or follow his heart? Would you trust the moment or protect your heart? Let us know in the comments. Morning came with golden light streaming through the tall glass windows. Naomi stirred slowly, eyes fluttering open on the sofa. The blanket had shifted sometime during the night. But it wasn't the blanket that made her heart catch. It was the second one, draped gently over her by someone else's hands. She sat up. The other end of the couch was empty. Grayson was in the kitchen, cooking. "Morning," he said without turning. Naomi blinked. "You cook?" He shrugged. "Not well, but the kids eat eggs, right?" Naomi leaned on the kitchen island, watching him crack eggs with more confidence than she expected. "I usually do this when no one's looking." "So you're showing off now?" she teased gently. He looked over his shoulder, half smiling. "Maybe." It was disarming, domestic, almost warm. Naomi hated how much she liked it. The twins woke and padded in with bedhead and sleepy giggles. Naomi scooped up Bella and kissed her forehead. Grayson lifted Ezra without hesitation. It wasn't perfect. He held him like someone still learning how to love again, but it was real. They all sat at the kitchen table, together, like a family. For one quiet morning, it felt like something out of a dream. Neither of them dared to speak aloud. Later, while the twins napped, Naomi stood by the laundry machines folding sheets. Grayson appeared in the doorway. "There's something I want to show you," he said quietly. Naomi followed him without asking. He led her to a room she hadn't seen before, a study, but not his. Soft wallpaper, a rocking chair, photos of Elise, baby footprints framed, half-filled journals. Naomi's breath caught. "She designed this room," Grayson said, "before she died." Naomi walked slowly toward the shelf. Her fingers traced the edge of a baby photo. "She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but I convinced her to keep her career, said we'd hire help, said it would be easier that way." His voice cracked. "She died resenting me." Naomi turned. She asked me to stay home the night before the C-section, just to talk, watch a movie. She was scared. Grayson stared at the carpet. But I took a call, worked late. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already in surgery. Silence wrapped the room. Naomi's eyes filled with quiet understanding. You blame yourself. I didn't get to say goodbye. Naomi's throat tightened. She crossed the room slowly. She would have forgiven you. He met her eyes. Would you? Naomi blinked. Me? If someone let you down like that? Her answer came too fast. I already did. Grayson frowned. Naomi looked down, twisting the fabric of her sleeve. The night my daughter stopped breathing. I was asleep. Grayson stood still. I'd been up for days. I finally dozed off. She was beside me in the hospital bed. I was touching her hand. Her voice cracked. When I woke up, she was gone. Tears slid down her cheeks. I didn't say goodbye either. Grayson stepped forward. Naomi, I never forgave myself. I never let anyone else in after that. Not really. He reached for her, hesitating, then placed a hand gently on her arm. She didn't pull away. Grief met grief, and in that space between them, something fragile began to heal. That night, Naomi opened the box she kept under her bed. Inside were baby shoes, a blanket, a pacifier she couldn't throw away. She sat with them in silence, her tears falling freely for the first time in years. In the room next door, Grayson stood over his sleeping children. His hand brushed Bella's hair. Then, without overthinking it, he walked to the guest room, knocked once, and when Naomi opened it, eyes red but shoulders steady, he said, "Tomorrow. Let's take them to the park." Naomi nodded. "Together," he added. She smiled softly. "Okay. Would you share your past with someone new, or would you keep it locked away?" Comment below. What's harder, letting go or letting someone in? Central Park glowed in the soft gold of a Saturday morning. Leaves crunched underfoot. The twins squealed in delight as Bella chased a squirrel and Ezra toddled toward a pile of leaves taller than him. Grayson stood beside Naomi, a paper coffee cup in hand. No bodyguard, no phone in sight, just him, her, the kids. No walls. Naomi wore her hair down for the first time since she'd started working at the Wolf residence. The soft curls caught the light. Grayson noticed, and she noticed him noticing. "Watch this, Daddy," Bella called. Grayson blinked. It was the first time she'd said it in months. He walked over, knelt, and watched her jump with 2 feet over a small puddle. Ezra clapped like it was the Olympics. Naomi laughed. It was the first time he realized how beautiful her laugh was. Not polished, not soft, just real. They stayed for hours, a shared pretzel, a chase around the duck pond. Naomi slipped once on a slick leaf and Grayson caught her by the elbow. "Careful," he said, their faces inches apart. "Thanks," she whispered, pulling back just before it lingered too long. But the moment hung between them like suspended air. Back at the penthouse, the twins napped, cheeks flushed from the cold. Grayson poured 2 glasses of cider, handed her one without asking. They sat on the floor of the nursery, just like she had weeks ago. "I forgot how good this room could feel," he said. Naomi smiled. "Love can do that." He looked over. "You really believe that?" She hesitated. "I didn't. Not for a long time." Grayson's voice lowered. "And now?" Naomi stared at the twins. "Now? Maybe." They talked for hours. About childhoods, favorite books, secret dreams. Grayson told her he used to paint when he was a teenager. "My father said it was a waste of time. Do you still paint?" "No," he said, "but sometimes I think about it." "You should." At one point, Naomi told him her daughter's middle name. Hope. She said it with a smile this time. No tears, just warmth. "I think about who she would have been, what her laugh might have sounded like." Grayson said nothing, just reached across the carpet and held her hand. No move. No pressure, just presence. Naomi didn't let go. Dinner was quiet, simple. The twins were too sleepy to fuss. Later, as Grayson cleared the table, Naomi leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him hum an off-key tune. "Do you ever stop being impressive?" she teased. He looked up, surprised. "I'm not trying to be." "That's what makes it worse," she smiled. There was something so natural about the way they moved now, like magnets finding their alignment. That night, Naomi tucked the twins in while Grayson read a bedtime story. His voice was soft, calm. When he reached the final page, Bella reached up and touched his cheek. "I love you, Daddy." Grayson blinked. He kissed her forehead. "I love you too, Bells." Naomi watched from the hallway, one hand over her chest. Later, as they walked back to the guest room, Grayson paused. "Can I show you something?" Naomi nodded. He led her to a closet in the back of the study and pulled out a canvas. Half finished. Soft strokes of grey and gold. A skyline. A mother holding a child. Rough, incomplete, but full of feeling. "I started this after Elise died. I haven't touched it since." Naomi walked closer. "It's beautiful." He looked at her. "I want to finish it." Naomi looked at the painting, then at him. "Then do it." He looked down, then slowly stepped forward. She didn't move. His hand reached up, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Naomi," he whispered. She exhaled softly. "I know." He leaned in. Their lips met in the softest, quietest kiss. It didn't rush, it didn't burn, it healed. When something feels this real, do you trust it, or wait for it to fall apart? Tell us in the comments. Can two broken hearts really build something whole? The kiss changed everything. For the first time in years, Naomi allowed herself to feel something that wasn't survival. And for the first time ever, Grayson let someone close without conditions or control. The next morning, they moved around each other with quiet smiles and subtle glances. Not lovers, not strangers, something in between, something new. But the world outside hadn't changed, and the past always finds a way back in. It started with whispers. The household staff wasn't blind. A lingering look here, a late-night tea there. Mrs. Lillian, the housekeeper, approached Naomi in the hallway. "I mean this kindly," she said, "but be careful." Naomi stiffened. "Careful of what?" "Of what this house does to women like us when they get too comfortable." Naomi's throat closed. "I've seen it before," Mrs. Lillian said. "A white man can kiss you in private and call it something special. But the world outside that door won't see it that way, neither will his board." Naomi tried to shake it off, but the words burrowed deep. She began to pull away, softly at first, missing eye contact, speaking only when needed. Grayson noticed. At first he assumed it was nerves, but by day 3 of the shift, he confronted her. "You're avoiding me," he said as they cleaned up after dinner. Naomi shook her head. "I'm just busy." "Don't lie to me." She flinched. Grayson stepped back. "I didn't mean that." "You're my boss," she said, voice sharp now. "It was a mistake." He blinked. "A mistake? This, us. It can't happen. It shouldn't have happened." "Naomi, where is this coming from?" She looked away. "You don't know what it's like to be me in your world." He stepped closer. "Then explain it. You don't get to ask me to open my soul in a house where I'm still expected to clean up after everyone when the music stops." He was quiet, stung. Naomi grabbed a dish towel, folded it too tightly. "You want something real, Grayson? Then stop seeing me as the woman who fixed your family for you." He stared at her. "No," he said finally. "I see you. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because I do feel something. And maybe that scares you more than it scares me." "You don't feel guilt?" she snapped. "For how easily this could all look, like you rescued the maid?" Grayson didn't respond. His silence was the answer. Naomi's voice softened, but it cut deeper. "You say you're trying, but when it matters, you still freeze." That night, Naomi packed a bag. She left the nursery door slightly open, heartbreaking. She whispered to the twins in their sleep, one hand on each tiny back. I love you, she breathed. Don't forget me. She left a note on the kitchen island. Thank you for everything, but I can't stay where I can't belong. Naomi Grayson found the note at dawn. He didn't react, not at first, just stood there, staring at her handwriting, the kitchen bathed in pale light. Then he crumpled it in his fist. He didn't go to work that day. He sat in the nursery all day. Bella climbed into his lap. Ezra played with his cufflinks, and Grayson just held them, silent, hollow. Ava showed up late that afternoon. She took one look at him and said, "You messed it up, didn't you?" "She left," Grayson replied. "Then go get her." "I don't know how." "Then figure it out," she snapped, "because I've never seen you fight for anything that mattered." He looked up, eyes red. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Then try. For once, try with your heart, not your money." Meanwhile, Naomi sat in her sister's guest bedroom in Queens, staring out the window. A pink onesie sat folded beside her suitcase. She hadn't brought it before, but this time she had packed it. Her heart still ached, but something inside her whispered, "He saw you. And you let him." And that mattered. Naomi didn't sleep that night. Her sister's apartment buzzed with city noise, horns, buses, late-night conversations through the thin walls, but all she could hear were echoes, Ezra's giggles, Bella saying, "Daddy," Grayson whispering, "You feel like home." She pressed her palm against the folded pink onesie in her suitcase. She had brought it as a goodbye. Now it felt like a question. Was she really going to walk away from the first thing that had felt like love in years? Grayson sat in the nursery, lights dimmed. He didn't call Ava, didn't leave voicemails, didn't call Naomi. He just sat, one arm around Bella, one hand resting on Ezra's back. The two of them slept tangled in his arms like they knew she was gone, and it broke him. He reached for his phone, typed Naomi's number, then deleted the message. Did she hate him? Was she gone for good? "You don't know what it's like to be me," she'd said. And she was right. He had loved Elise, yes, but Elise had fit his world, came from money, private schools, white picket safety. She didn't have to defend her space. Naomi had walked into his home with nothing but quiet dignity and earned every ounce of trust, of love, of connection. He had failed her the moment he let her doubt that. The next morning, Naomi watched a mother with two toddlers on the subway platform. The younger one dropped a stuffed rabbit and started wailing. Naomi instinctively crouched to pick it up before the mother noticed. She handed it over gently. The little girl looked up at her, teary-eyed, and whispered, "Thank you." Naomi's heart clenched. That afternoon she visited a daycare center near her sister's apartment, just to see it. The receptionist greeted her kindly. "Are you applying for a position?" Naomi smiled. "Just thinking." The walls were painted with handprints, the bookshelf overstuffed with stories. One child ran to the front desk with a crayon drawing of their mom. Naomi nodded to herself. "Thank you," she said, and left. Across the city, Grayson finally did what he hadn't in years. He painted. Brush strokes, slow, shaky. The canvas began to take shape. Not a mother this time, but a woman on the floor, curled between two cribs, holding light in her arms. He didn't cry, but he bled into the painting, and when it was finished he stared at it. Then he whispered, "Come home." Naomi returned to her sister's that evening to find a package by the door. No note, no sender. Inside, a frame. A painting. The painting. She gasped. Her eyes filled instantly, the brushwork, the detail, the quiet reverence. He had painted her, not as a maid, not even as a mother, but as a guardian. A heart, a place where love lived. Her fingers trembled. There was no note, just a business card taped to the back. Grayson Wolfe, you were never the maid. You were the miracle. Naomi sat down on the edge of the bed, staring, shaking, breathing. She closed her eyes and made a decision. Back at the penthouse, Grayson was reading to the twins again, alone. Halfway through the book, Bella pointed at the door. "Naomi," she whispered. Grayson looked up. His heart dropped. No one was there. But then, soft footsteps. Naomi stepped in, holding the frame in her arms. "I believe you left something at my door," she said. Grayson stood. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me." "I didn't know if I wanted to," she replied, "but then I looked at the painting and I saw the truth." Grayson swallowed. "What truth?" "That you see me." Silence. Then, "And I see you too." She walked into the nursery. Bella reached for her instantly. Ezra squealed with joy. Naomi sat between the cribs again like she had that very first night. Grayson knelt beside her. Their shoulders touched. This time, she leaned in, and this time, he stayed. Do you believe true love is about timing or about courage? Drop your thoughts below. What would you have done in Naomi's shoes? 3 weeks later, the Wolf residence didn't feel like the same place. It wasn't the decor, or the layout, or even the people. It was the atmosphere. The silence had changed, from cold and empty to peaceful. The rooms didn't echo anymore. Laughter filled the halls. Warmth came not from fireplaces, but from presence. Naomi was no longer just in the home. She was part of it. Grayson had offered her a new title, Child Development Specialist, equal pay, equal standing. But Naomi had laughed softly and said, "I don't need a title to know who I am here." Still, he had insisted. Because it wasn't about the label. It was about respect. And she deserved that. Every inch of it. One Sunday morning, Naomi stepped into the nursery to find Grayson asleep on the floor. Ezra tucked under one arm. Bella curled against his chest. She froze. It was exactly how he had found her once. Only now, the roles had reversed. Her hand went to her mouth, emotion overwhelming her. Grayson stirred, saw her standing there, and smiled sleepily. "There's something magical about this floor," he said. Naomi chuckled through her tears. "It's where love started." That afternoon, they took the twins to the botanical garden. Naomi wore a sundress. Grayson wore jeans. For once, he didn't check his phone even once. As the kids chased butterflies, Naomi turned to him. "You're different." He tilted his head. "How so?" "You're here," she said. "I was always here." "No," she said gently. "You were around. Now, you're with us." Grayson looked toward the twins, then back at her. "Because I finally have something worth showing up for." He took her hand, and this time there was no hesitation. At bedtime, Bella pulled Naomi close. "Will you stay tonight?" Naomi looked at Grayson. He nodded, so she stayed. She held the children as they drifted off. Grayson sat nearby, just watching her. The quiet awe in his eyes said everything. When the twins were fully asleep, he whispered, "Naomi?" She looked up. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a tiny velvet box. Her heart stopped. "I'm not asking for now. I'm asking for someday," he said. "But I need you to know. This wasn't an accident. You didn't just help me raise them, you raised me too." Her eyes filled instantly. She opened the box. Inside, not a diamond, but a simple gold band etched with one word: home. Months passed. Naomi started night classes again, early childhood development. Grayson insisted on helping with the twins during her study hours. One evening, as Naomi walked in after a late class, she paused in the hallway. The nursery door was slightly ajar. Grayson sat cross-legged on the rug. Ezra snuggled against his side. Bella sat in his lap, book open. Naomi smiled. She had seen that scene before. Only now, it wasn't just healing. It was whole. Do you believe true love can survive even after being tested this hard? Share your thoughts, or your own story of unexpected love, in the comments. Someone might need to hear it today. Years later, people still whispered, the billionaire who fell in love with his maid. But they always missed the real story. It wasn't about wealth, or status, or scandal. It was about two broken people who found their way back to life, through love, on a cold nursery floor. He told her to pack her things, right there in front of the twins. His voice was loud, final, the kind of final that comes from a man who's buried his wife and never healed after. But just as she turned to leave, a small voice broke through the silence. "Don't send her away." Then another, "Please, Daddy. She makes it feel warm again." And in that moment, the man who thought nothing could touch him stood absolutely still. Because the sons who hadn't spoken in weeks just did. And it wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it, like they were remembering something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Richard James didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. His wife, Claire, was the miracle. And when cancer took her, he locked every soft thing in a box and buried it beside her, including himself. Since then, his mansion became a place of order, not love. Of rules, not grace. Of silence, not laughter. His sons hadn't smiled since the funeral. They hadn't spoken in over a month. And Richard, he convinced himself that emotions were weakness, that pain should be kept behind doors, that if he could control everything, then nothing would ever hurt again. And then she showed up, Stella Gray, a quiet woman with soft eyes and a habit of humming hymns while folding laundry. He didn't like her. He didn't trust softness. He certainly didn't trust the way his sons looked at her, like they remembered what safety felt like. So when he came home that Thursday afternoon and found her kneeling on the floor with both boys wrapped around her, he snapped. His voice filled the marble hallway. "What is this? What did I tell you about boundaries?" She stood slowly, one twin still holding her leg. "Sir, you're done here." His tone left no room for discussion. "Pack your things. I want you out by the hour." She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just looked at him gently as if she saw through all the noise. And then God moved, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a whisper. A whisper that came from Freddie, age 5. He looked up at his father, his voice, small, trembling, alive. "Don't send her away." Richard froze. Freddie hadn't spoken in 37 days. Before he could react, Oliver stepped forward, gripping his sleeve. "She makes it feel warm again, Daddy." That's when something inside Richard cracked, not all the way, but enough. Enough for him to stop yelling, enough for him to feel the sting of tears he swore he'd never cry again. The hallway was silent now, not cold, just still. The kind of still where God speaks. Stella didn't say anything at first. She just knelt, resting a hand on each boy's shoulder, a quiet prayer echoing in her spirit. "Lord, don't let this man push them further into silence. Let him see. Let him remember." And Richard, he didn't know why his knees felt weak, or why his dead wife's voice came to him just then. A memory. "You don't have to do this alone, Rich. Let them be held." It was too much. He turned, left the hallway without another word. But something had changed, and Stella knew. Not because he softened, but because he didn't slam the door. Sometimes God doesn't fix the storm. He just sends someone who doesn't leave. If this moment touched you, click subscribe, like this video, and let us know where you're watching from. I pray this story reminds you, sometimes God sends healing in the form of a person who simply stays. The hallway was still quiet when Stella zipped up her small suitcase. She'd folded her uniform carefully, as if doing so gently might ease the ache in her chest. She wasn't surprised by the outcome. She had seen this kind of pain before. Grief that builds walls so tall, even love can't climb them without permission. But still, she had hoped. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, hands resting in her lap, heart steady but heavy. Sometimes obedience doesn't look like staying. Sometimes it looks like walking away when God hasn't made the next step clear. She closed her eyes, whispered under her breath, "If you sent me here for only that moment, I trust you. But if there's more, Lord, I make it plain I won't force my way into anyone's healing." Then, a knock. Soft, hesitant, not from authority, from small fingers and courage. She opened the door, expecting silence. Instead, she found Oliver. His cheeks were flushed from crying. In his hand, a drawing, a stick figure family, 2 little boys, 1 tall man, and 1 woman. In the middle, she stood holding hands with them. No words, just that. He looked up at her, lips trembling. She didn't say anything, just knelt beside him. And in the quiet, her eyes stung, not from sadness, but from knowing. This boy, this silent, closed-off, broken-hearted boy, had chosen her. The next morning came slower than usual. The sun rose, but the house remained dim, as if unsure it was allowed to be warm again. Stella stood in the kitchen, not in uniform this time. No apron, no instructions, no clarity. Just waiting. She wasn't sure if she'd already been replaced. But she stayed. Sometimes, waiting is obedience too. A soft clatter echoed behind her. 2 chairs slid across the kitchen floor. The twins, climbing into their seats, waiting quietly for breakfast like they always did, except now they were watching her. Freddie spoke first. A whisper, barely there. "Pancakes?" She turned slowly. "You remember I made pancakes?" He nodded. Stella blinked back the sudden sting in her chest. Then pancakes it is. She didn't need permission. She needed purpose. And right now, their hunger felt holy. The batter sizzled. Butter melted on the skillet. The boys sat still, but their eyes followed her every move. Halfway through flipping the first stack, she heard footsteps again. This time, slower, measured. Richard James entered the room. His suit was crisp, but his eyes weren't sharp this morning. They looked like a man who hadn't slept, like a man who had listened to the silence and found it heavier than he could carry. He didn't speak, didn't order, didn't even ask why she was still here, just watched. And for the first time since Claire died, he saw his sons giggle at pancake bubbles, saw Oliver reach across the table to poke his brother's cheek, saw Freddie whisper something only Stella heard, and saw her smile back with eyes that knew children better than any manual ever could. He leaned against the doorframe and said nothing. But inside, something was breaking, not like glass, more like ground thawing after a long winter. Later that morning, Stella stepped outside to catch her breath, not because she was tired, but because too much good after too much grief feels like holding your breath underwater. She leaned against the back wall of the house, her eyes closed toward the sky. "If you're doing something, Lord, keep me soft. Let me be what they need, even if I never get credit for it." When she turned back toward the house, Richard was standing behind the glass, watching. Not glaring, not angry, just watching. Like he didn't know what to do with a moment that didn't ask him to lead it. By evening, the house had shifted. Not loud, not bright, but different. A napkin left unfolded, a toy left on the couch, and laughter just once from upstairs. Stella didn't know what the next day would hold, whether she'd be allowed to stay or if this was just a borrowed moment. But she did know this. Something had opened. And when God opens something, no man can close it. She walked past the study late that night. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Richard sat at his desk staring at an old photo. Claire, holding the boys, her arms wide, her smile wide, her eyes bright with something this house had forgotten. Joy. He didn't notice Stella passing, but she saw him. Saw the way he gripped the frame like it was keeping him alive. Saw the way his shoulders sagged just slightly, as if he was finally letting grief fall where it belonged. On the ground. At God's feet. The next morning came quietly. No raised voices, no instructions, no permission either. Just Stella in the kitchen, humming as she poured pancake batter into a warmed skillet, and 2 little boys with tousled blonde hair sitting at the table, waiting like they had always belonged to the moment. It was only her 5th day at the estate, but something in the air already felt different, not healed, but softer. She wasn't wearing the uniform today. It felt wrong, too pressed, too distant, so she wore a pale blue blouse and jeans, simple and clean. Nothing fancy. But she'd always believed warmth didn't come from clothes anyway. It came from presence. The boys seemed lighter. Freddie was tapping the spoon against his glass, not to annoy, just to hear the sound. Oliver giggled when she flipped a pancake too high and had to catch it with a plate. There was a looseness to them now. Not loud, but alive. She almost forgot this wasn't hers to keep, until he walked in. Richard James entered the kitchen with the tension of a man still wearing grief like armor. His jaw was tight, his sleeves perfectly rolled, not a hair out of place. But his eyes didn't match the rest of him today. They looked like someone who hadn't decided who he needed to be yet. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, long enough for Freddie to notice, long enough for Oliver to turn in his seat and go still. The joy in the room slipped into hiding. The boys didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared at their father like they were waiting for permission to exist again. Stella stayed by the stove, calm, but alert. She could feel it coming, the command. Richard cleared his throat. "Miss Gray." His voice was formal, cold. "We need to talk." She turned, gently, met his eyes, didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." "Not here." The boys looked between them. Stella gave a quiet smile to the boys. "Finish your breakfast. I'll be right back." Freddie nodded slowly, eyes wide. Oliver's lips pressed into a tight line, but he stayed seated. That was new. A week ago they would have followed her like shadows. Now, they trusted her promise. The study door clicked shut behind them. Books lined the walls. Everything was sharp and dark, mahogany wood, leather chairs, spotless floors, like a room built for control. Richard stood behind his desk, fingers clenched around the back of his chair. Stella stood across from him, hands folded in front of her. Still, respectful, but not afraid. He let silence hang for a moment too long, then spoke. "You were hired to clean, not to play, not to counsel, not to interfere." Stella held his gaze. "I understand." He paced once behind the chair. His voice dropped lower. "You were told the boys need structure, boundaries, professional supervision." Stella spoke gently. "And in that structure they stopped speaking." He froze. Not because he didn't know it, but because hearing it out loud sounded like failure. She continued, voice soft as cloth. "I didn't touch them first, they came to me. I didn't ask them to speak, but when they did..." Her eyes flickered with emotion, but her tone stayed steady. "I knew better than to silence it." Richard looked at her then, truly looked, not like an employee, like a person who had seen something he hadn't, and that made him angry, not at her, at everything, at the fact that it wasn't supposed to be her. Not some woman from a cleaning agency with a quiet voice and no degree in child psychology. Not someone humming hymns while folding towels. "Why you?" he said quietly, more to himself than her. Stella didn't answer right away. She just let the question sit in the room, because she'd asked herself the same thing, every night. Then she stepped forward, not closer, just clearer. "Because I've known loss, Mr. James. I've seen what it does when it hardens people, and I've seen what happens when someone stays long enough to soften it again." He looked away then, swallowed hard. She didn't push, didn't try to fix him. She just stood still, like a presence that didn't demand anything. Sometimes that's all grief needs. Not words, not action. Just someone who doesn't leave when it gets heavy. He finally spoke again. "I haven't heard them laugh in months." It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't denial either. She nodded gently. "They're not healed, but they're reaching." His gaze met hers once more. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Her reply was soft, almost like prayer. "I won't. But I'll keep showing up." He didn't answer, just sat down at his desk, rubbing his temples. The conversation was over, not resolved, but open, and for now, that was enough. Stella stepped back into the hallway. The boys were still at the table, Crayon drawings spread between them. Freddie looked up, worry flickering in his eyes. Stella gave the smallest nod, a quiet yes. She was still here. And somewhere in the study behind her, a man who thought God had left his house sat with his head in his hands, wondering why the silence felt different today. That night the wind was heavy across the hill. Branches tapped the windows, the kind of restless tapping that made the house feel uneasy, like it too remembered something it didn't want to feel. Stella stood by the guest room window, arms wrapped loosely around her waist, eyes on the darkness outside. She hadn't unpacked. Her bag still sat on the bench, half zipped, half ready. She never stayed too long in any house. Sometimes grief didn't push you out, it simply never invited you in. Down the hall, laughter, soft and sleepy, drifted from the boys' room. A storybook, some giggles, a whispered, "Good night." It should have been comforting, but instead it pressed against something buried inside her. She blinked slowly. Her hands tightened. Then she walked over to the bag and pulled out a small, battered photo. Edges worn, folded once down the middle. A boy, maybe 10 years old. Freckles, a smile too wide for his face. Her little brother, Joshua. She sat on the bed, turning the photo over, a scribbled verse in faint blue ink. Even if he doesn't, he is still good. Daniel, 3:18. Her thumb brushed the edge of the page. That verse had been taped to his hospital bed. She'd written it, but after the fire, after the smoke, the screaming, the split-second choice to grab the baby next door first, she stopped believing it, stopped teaching, stopped singing, stopped letting herself be close to anyone who might reach for her and not survive. A soft knock pulled her back. Not loud, just one knock. Then the door creaked open. It was Oliver, in pajama pants too long and a mismatched shirt, hair sticking up on one side like he'd fallen asleep and woken up just to come find her. In his hand, a drawing. Another one. This one had 3 figures, 2 boys, 1 woman. No man this time, just the 3 of them under a sun that looked more like a heart. He walked over and held it out. She took it slowly. "You made this tonight?" He nodded. Then, for the first time, spoke with quiet certainty. "Freddie said you don't leave." Her breath caught. Not because the words were dramatic, but because they were true. He climbed up beside her without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when he leaned his head against her arm, she whispered into the silence, "I lost someone too." His fingers stilled against the fabric of her shirt. "My brother, a long time ago. He was small, kind. He loved building things out of cardboard." She smiled faintly. "After he died, I stopped building anything at all." Oliver didn't speak, but he didn't leave either. His presence gave her permission to continue. "I was a teacher once, but grief made me question if I could protect anyone again. So I cleaned instead. It was easier to scrub away other people's messes than face the mess inside myself." She exhaled, voice low. "But God kept placing children in my path. One here, one there, and then you two." Oliver looked up at her. "God sent you?" The question was so innocent, so raw, it nearly undid her. She could have brushed it off, could have smiled and nodded like adults do when the truth hurts too much, but she didn't. She looked him in the eyes. "I think God sent you to remind me not to run anymore." Oliver's lower lip trembled, but he smiled. Not wide, not bright, but real. Later, when he'd fallen asleep beside her, she carried him gently back to his room. Freddie stirred when she laid his brother down, opened his eyes, reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation, held it longer than necessary, and in that quiet, something lifted from the room. Not the pain, not the past, but the weight of walking through it alone. She walked back to her room, her feet light, but her heart full. God hadn't healed her wound, but he was using it. Not through grand gestures, but through 2 little boys who drew pictures with hearts for sons. Down the hallway a door creaked. Richard, standing in the shadows, watching. He hadn't said a word all night, but his sons had laughed, and the woman he tried to fire had held both their hearts in her hands, without asking for anything in return. He turned back toward his study, pulled open a drawer he hadn't touched in months. Inside, a letter, still sealed, Claire's handwriting on the front. He stared at it, but didn't open it. Not yet. The morning light didn't touch the house the same way it had the day before. It filtered in slower, as if uncertain, stretching long shadows across the walls and settling in corners that still remembered grief. Stella stood in the linen hallway, folding warm towels from the dryer, her hands moving on instinct. Her mind elsewhere. Last night hadn't left her. The drawing. The boy curled against her shoulder. The memory of her brother's name whispered in the quiet of her room. Some things stay in the skin long after they leave the air. Across the corridor, the boys were building something with blocks. Stella could hear the soft clatter, the kind that sounded more like restoration than play. They were healing, not because she taught them, but because they felt safe. And yet, she didn't feel settled. Richard hadn't spoken to her since the conversation in the study. Not a word, not a glance. Just silence where suspicion used to be. But silence had weight, and this one felt heavier than before. She walked past the main hall, her steps light. A family portrait hung by the staircase. Claire smiling, her arms around the boys, Richard behind them, distant even in the frame. It was the only photo in the house with her face on it. Stella paused there. Claire didn't look fragile. She looked bright, present, like she was the warmth this place was trying to remember. She moved on without touching it. The boys had asked her to help them find their lost puzzle pieces, said they were hidden in the closet by the soft stuff. She assumed they meant blankets, but when she opened the linen closet by the end of the west wing, something caught her eye. A small cardboard box, tucked behind folded quilts and labeled only with a name. Claire. No last name. She stood frozen just for a moment. Not from fear but reverence, she could feel it. This wasn't clutter, it was sacred. She reached for it gently, holding it as if it might break or breathe. She brought it to the sitting room, where light filtered through the lace curtains just enough to make the dust shimmer. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, the box between her knees. She didn't open it, not at first. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer with no language. Just surrender. Then she lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of drawings, clearly the boys', with their shaky handwriting and bold, chaotic color. One said, "Mommy's hair in the wind." Another, "Mommy in heaven but still watching." Beneath them, a collection of small audio tapes, labeled in pen. For the hard days, if they ever forget how to laugh. To Richard, when you feel far away. And then, at the very bottom, a letter, sealed, his name written in blue ink. For Richard, open when silence feels safer than love. Stella's hand trembled. She didn't open it. It wasn't hers. She just stared at the envelope, realizing it had been there all along, unopened, unheard, and suddenly, she wasn't angry at him. She just felt sad. Because sometimes grief doesn't forget, it buries. She heard footsteps behind her, not fast, but deliberate. She turned, the box still in her lap. Richard stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other hanging awkwardly by his side. His eyes didn't go to her. They went to the box, and for the first time, something in his face changed. Not rage, not confusion, recognition. He exhaled, a small, sharp breath, as if his own name startled him. Stella didn't move. She didn't explain. She simply held the box out, arms extended, like someone offering back a memory that never belonged to her. Richard stared at it, then stepped forward, slowly. He knelt. Not beside her, not close, just low enough to feel the weight of what he'd ignored. He reached for the letter, paused, then let his hand fall. "I can't." It was barely a whisper. Stella nodded. "I know." His voice cracked. She used to record things. After the boys went to sleep, she said love leaves a trail, even if no one's following it yet. Stella watched him, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his voice softened as if speaking to someone long gone, or maybe still here. "She left this trail for you," she said gently. "And for them." He didn't reply, but he took the box from her hands, cradled it like something living, and stood. The moment didn't close anything, but something opened, not between them, inside him. That night, the boys asked if they could listen to a mommy tape, said they remembered the sound of her voice, but just barely. Richard stood in the doorway as Stella placed the first tape into the old recorder. Claire's voice filled the room, soft, strong, familiar. "If you forget how to love, let the boys remind you. If the house gets too quiet, bring someone in who knows how to listen between the silences." Stella didn't look at Richard, but she could feel it. The shaking breath he let out, the way his hand curled against the doorframe. She closed her eyes, not to escape the moment, but to let it land. Sometimes God speaks not through thunder, but through a voice left behind on tape. It started with laughter, not loud, not wild. Just a giggle, soft and surprised, in the middle of a Tuesday breakfast. Freddie spilled a spoonful of syrup on his pajama shirt, and Oliver made a face like it was the end of the world. Then they both laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes from a place not even they knew was waking up. Stella froze for a second, spatula in hand, mid-flip. She didn't speak, didn't draw attention to it. She just let it live. Because joy, especially fragile joy, should never feel interrupted. Across the kitchen, Richard stood behind the morning paper, still, silent, but not unreadable. His eyes had lifted when the boys laughed, and for a breath or two, they stayed lifted. But then he looked back down. The days began to shift in small ways. The boys started speaking more, not in long sentences, but in patterns, in questions, in giggles that echoed into rooms that hadn't heard childhood in months. They began leaving their toys in the living room, their socks on the stairs. They fought over which pancakes were crispier. They asked for seconds. And in the middle of it all was Stella, humming softly under her breath, always listening, always near. The house felt warmer, not by temperature, but by presence. It wasn't perfect. Grief still hung in corners. Claire's absence still hovered in every room, but something had changed. This house was breathing again. That afternoon, Stella sat in the garden just beyond the kitchen, sorting through a basket of the boys' outgrown clothes for donation. The air smelled like soil and rosemary. A breeze pushed through the hydrangeas. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there when Richard stepped out. No jacket, no phone, no clipboard, just him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her fold a tiny shirt with sailboats on it. "I bought that for Freddie when we took them to the lake," he said quietly. Claire said it made him look like a storybook sailor. Stella smiled but didn't look up. "Fits him." A pause, then, "You stayed," he said. She lifted her gaze slowly, met his eyes. "Yes," she replied. "I didn't know if I should, but I felt led." He sat down on the edge of the bench, hands resting on his knees. "I don't understand why this hurts more now than it did before." His voice wasn't defensive. It was honest, worn. Stella set the basket aside. "Because before, you kept everything numb," she said. "And now, the feeling is coming back." Richard ran a hand through his hair. She made it all look easy. The parenting, the laughter, the way she gave. "I never learned how to do that without her." "You don't have to do it perfectly," Stella said. "You just have to show up." A moment passed, then another. The wind picked up again, rustling the pages of a book left open on the garden table. He looked toward the sound, then back at her. "Do you believe God and puts people in our lives like this?" he asked. Stella didn't answer right away. "I believe God doesn't waste pain," she said slowly. "And I believe he sends help, sometimes through people we never saw coming." Richard's jaw clenched, but not with anger, with restraint. He looked down at his hands. I've spent months trying to control everything. The schedule, the boys, the silence. Because the truth is, I didn't want anyone to see how badly I was breaking. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, fully, quietly. Some nights, I still wake up expecting her to be there, he said. I reach across the bed, and when I remember, it all floods back. His voice cracked. I thought I was keeping the boys safe by locking everything down. No music, no touch, no emotion. He shook his head. But I was really just trying not to feel. Stella's voice came like water. But they were still feeling, alone. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The only sound was the garden wind and the distant laugh of a boy chasing his brother. Then, something shifted. Richard looked up. Tears didn't fall, but his face was no longer guarded. There was pain there, but also humility. Something that said, I know I can't keep this house cold forever. That night, Stella didn't pray to stay. She just prayed that whatever God was doing, he'd keep doing it, even if it broke every rule this house once lived by. After the boys went to sleep, Richard stood alone in Claire's old study. The box was still there. The letter, unopened. He ran his fingers over the sealed edge, pressed his thumb beneath the flap, then stopped. Not tonight, but soon, very soon. And in the hallway just beyond, the hum of Stella's voice as she quietly picked up a scattered toy, like a lullaby not meant to be noticed, but still deeply felt. The storm rolled in just after midnight. No warning, no gentle breeze to announce its arrival, just thunder. Close, fast, unforgiving. The kind of storm that wakes a house in its bones. Rain pounded the windows like 100 fists. Wind curled around the estate like it wanted in. Stella was already up. Something had stirred her before the first crack of thunder. Not sound, but a feeling. A tension in the air. A whisper in her spirit. She slipped from bed barefoot and moved through the dark with quiet urgency. Not toward the hallway, but toward the boys' room. When she pushed the door open, she didn't hear crying. She heard silence. Too still, too tight. Then her eyes adjusted. Freddie sat up in bed, his fingers gripping the quilt. But it was Noah, curled against the headboard, shaking, who made her stop. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving, just frozen. As thunder cracked again, Stella entered slowly, keeping her voice low. Hey, sweetheart. But Noah didn't look up. His hands were balled into fists, pressed against his mouth. Freddie watched, eyes wide and scared. He didn't know what to do. He only knew this wasn't normal. Stella knelt beside the bed. It's just a storm, baby. Just the sky being loud. Noah flinched. His chest rose and fell too fast. Breath caught halfway between inhale and panic. And Stella knew then. This wasn't just about thunder. This was about memory. The kind that hides until lightning calls it back. The door burst open behind her. Richard. He looked half asleep, fully alarmed, his shirt clinging to one side and his hair undone. His eyes locked onto Noah. What happened? His voice was sharper than intended. Freddie shrank back in the bed. Noah didn't respond, still shaking, still silent. Richard stepped forward. I'll call Dr. Lang. He said if this happens, he needs presence. Stella interrupted softly. Richard stopped, his fists clenched. Presence doesn't stop panic. Stella looked up at him. No, but panic doesn't survive love. It wasn't a challenge. It was truth. She turned back to Noah, staying close, but not touching. Not yet. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. He rocked slightly, whispered something that sounded like Mom. It shattered something in Richard's posture. He dropped to one knee beside the bed. His voice cracked. Noah. The boy didn't respond. He was too far in, too deep. Stella reached behind her, grasped one of the boy's worn blankets, and gently laid it across his lap. Then she began humming. Soft, low, not to fix, but to steady. A song her mother once sang in the middle of hard nights. Not a lullaby. A prayer. Richard just stared, helpless, unarmed. This was the moment he had spent months trying to prevent. And now it was here, and all his defenses were useless. Noah's fists began to loosen. Barely. But enough. His breathing slowed. One hand uncurled and reached out, not for Stella, for his father. Richard didn't move at first. Then slowly, he placed his hand beneath his son's. Noah gripped it, tight. And then, for the first time in weeks, he cried. Not from fear, from release. The room went quiet. The storm still screamed outside, but inside, something calmed. Stella stepped back. Let them have it. The moment, the breakthrough, the grace. Later, after the boys had fallen asleep, Noah still holding onto Richard's shirt, Stella found herself in the hallway outside their room. She leaned against the wall, hands trembling, not from fear, from awe. God had shown up. In the middle of thunder, he had answered a prayer too deep for words, and she had watched a father finally hold his son without hiding behind control. Richard stepped out not long after. He looked undone, and more human than he'd ever appeared. His voice was hoarse. I didn't know what to do. Stella met his eyes. You didn't have to know. You just had to stay. He nodded once, then, thank you. It wasn't enough, but it was honest. She didn't reply, just placed a gentle hand on his arm and gave the smallest nod. There would be more storms. But now, he knew how to weather one. Later that night, Richard sat alone in the boys' playroom, staring at a wooden block tower still standing from the afternoon. He picked up one of the blocks, held it in his palm, and wept. Quietly. Not because of what was lost, but because, for the first time, he believed healing might still be possible. The morning after the storm, the house held its breath. No voices, no rushing, only a quiet that felt reverent. The kind of silence that follows a sacred breaking. Richard sat alone in Claire's old study. The curtains were half drawn, letting in soft morning light that painted the room in gold and dust. On the desk in front of him, the box sat open, and next to it, the letter, still sealed, still waiting. He hadn't touched it yet. He didn't even reach for his coffee, didn't check his phone, didn't move. He just sat there, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes locked on a name written in blue ink. Claire. Not wife, not mother. Just Claire. The woman who once laughed in this room while folding baby clothes and humming to herself like she didn't know life could break. He missed her most in silence, not in anniversaries or milestones, but in mornings like this, when the boys were still asleep, and the only sound was the ache of her absence. He finally reached for the envelope. The paper felt thin, but it shook in his hands like it carried weight. He didn't open it right away. He held it to his chest for a moment, closed his eyes. God, if I'm going to read this, help me listen. And then, slowly, he tore the seal. The letter unfolded like it had been waiting years to breathe. Claire's handwriting, familiar, full of loops and kindness, spilled across the page in quiet strength. My love, she wrote, if you're reading this, it means the house has gone quiet. I always knew it might. You were never built for loss, Richard. You built walls for business, for negotiation, but not for grief. That kind of pain doesn't obey plans, it doesn't follow schedules. You tried to hold everything together. You did. But sometimes, holding too tight is what makes things fall apart. The boys don't need perfection. They need presence, laughter, mess, noise, and you. Let them feel, let them cry, let them be hugged until they fall asleep in your arms again. And if the house forgets how to breathe, bring someone in who knows how to listen between the silences. The last line stopped him. He read it twice, then a third time. His breath shuddered. He thought he'd done what was best, by keeping the house in order, by locking away anything soft. But he had misunderstood strength, and mistaken grief for failure. Stella's voice came back to him then, from the night before. You don't have to know what to do. You just have to stay. And he had. Not perfectly. Not gracefully. But he had stayed. The sound of feet padded softly in the hallway. Not rushed, just familiar. Richard folded the letter, pressed it against his chest, and turned. The door cracked open. Stella stood there, her hand resting on the frame. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. I read it, he said. Her expression softened. He stood slowly, walked toward her, the letter still in hand. For a moment, they simply stood in the quiet. Two people not trying to fix anything, just letting truth settle between them. Later that afternoon, Richard called a meeting with his board. He stood at the head of a long glass table in a room filled with polished ambition. But this time, he didn't speak from authority. He spoke from honesty. My sons need a father right now, not a CEO. Some of the men and women exchanged glances, but no one interrupted. He continued. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back. Not to escape, but to show up. We've built towers that scrape the sky, but I've forgotten how to build a home. By evening, the house was still quiet, but not empty. The boys ran through the hallway chasing a balloon, laughing as it floated just out of reach. Stella was in the kitchen, humming over a pot of soup, the kind of tune you don't sing to be heard, just to keep peace near. And Richard. He stood by the living room window, watching his sons move with the kind of joy that once felt extinct. His fingers brushed the edge of Claire's letter, tucked inside his shirt pocket. He didn't smile, not fully, but something in his eyes broke open, like light through a sky long overcast. That night, he sat in the boys' room, not as a visitor, as their father. He told them a story. One Claire used to tell, about a lighthouse and a storm. Freddie rested his head on his shoulder. Noah clutched his hand, and when they fell asleep, Richard stayed, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. And for the first time he whispered a prayer, not for success, not for control, just gratitude. Thank you for not leaving us in the silence. It was Stella who found it, tucked high in the attic, in a corner that hadn't been touched since Claire's last spring. The light came in through a dusty pane of glass, painting long beams across boxes labeled Christmas, Baby Toys, Claire. She had only meant to find a blanket. But instead, she found a trunk. Inside, music sheets, old letters and journals, and a red cloth tail spilling out from the edge of a folded object. A kite, worn, a little frayed, but beautiful. Hand-painted with bluebirds in flight and Claire's handwriting on the tail, for the days when joy feels far. Later that afternoon, she showed it to the boys. Noah traced the birds with his fingertips. Freddie read the words softly, lips moving like a prayer. Neither of them had flown a kite before, but they knew what it was. And somehow, they knew it mattered. The hill behind the estate wasn't large, but it rose just enough to catch the wind. Stella walked up with the boys, while the late autumn sun sank gently into the earth behind them. Richard followed at a distance. He hadn't been on that hill since Claire died. It was where they used to sit, on Sunday afternoons, when the world was quiet and their boys were still small enough to carry. The grass crunched underfoot, and when they reached the top, the wind lifted suddenly, as if summoned. Stella knelt to tie the string around the boy's hands. "You hold it," she said, "but let the wind do the rest." They ran. At first the kite stumbled, lifted once, fell. Freddie looked discouraged, but Noah tugged the string tighter, held his breath, then ran again. This time, it caught. The red kite rose high above them, dancing against the deepening sky. It pulled and soared, tail fluttering like a memory made visible. Richard stopped walking, just watched. Watched his sons running, watched their laughter returning, watched Stella's face tilted upward, her smile soft and knowing. He felt something in his chest. Not pain, but space. Room. He walked the rest of the way. Didn't speak. Just stood beside them, eyes following the kite as it climbed higher. Freddie tugged his sleeve. "Mom made it." Richard looked down. "We found it in her trunk," Noah added. "She wanted us to fly it." There was no mistaking the hope in their voices, not the kind children fake, the kind that returns when sorrow begins to loosen its grip. He crouched beside them, took the string from Noah's hand for a moment, held it up toward the sky, let it pull, and whispered, so only they could hear, "She'd be proud of you." As the sun slipped below the tree line, the kite danced like a flame against the sky. Not a goodbye, a signal that something was still rising even after everything else had fallen. Later that night, Stella found Richard in the kitchen. He was pouring 2 mugs of tea. When he turned, he handed one to her. Didn't say much, just smiled, and slid an envelope across the counter. She opened it slowly. Inside, a formal offer. Child engagement specialist. Full-time. With a note handwritten at the bottom. "This house is breathing again. Stay if you still feel called." Her eyes lingered on the word. Called, not hired. Called. She looked up. Richard's voice was quiet. "You didn't come to save us, I know that. But God used you anyway." She swallowed hard. "I didn't come to stay." He nodded. "But maybe staying is obedience now." They didn't need to say more. Some answers don't arrive as sentences. Only peace. Later that night, Richard sat on the edge of the boys' bed, reading from Claire's old storybook. Both boys had fallen asleep mid-chapter, heads resting on his arms. He didn't move. The red kite sat folded near the window. The wind outside had stilled, but in his heart something was just beginning to lift. He kissed each boy on the forehead, and before he turned out the light, he looked toward the ceiling, eyes wet, but smiling. "I'm learning, Claire," he whispered. "I'm still learning." The house didn't look different. The marble floors still gleamed. The grand staircase still curved like a sculpture carved into silence. But something had shifted. You could feel it. In the way the walls no longer echoed with emptiness. In the way laughter no longer felt like a stranger. In the way the front door no longer felt like a finish line, but a welcome. Stella stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled, rinsing blueberries for breakfast. No apron, no uniform, just comfort woven into the rhythm of morning. A cartoon hummed quietly from the living room, where the twins sat shoulder to shoulder, building a fort from cushions and giggles. From time to time, one of them would glance toward the kitchen, just to make sure she was still there. She always was. Upstairs, Richard stood in what used to be Claire's reading room. Now it was something new. The walls were painted soft yellow, bookshelves lined the corners, a piano by the window, crayon art taped to one wall like stained glass. They called it Claire's Corner. Not as a shrine, but as a beginning. A room for memory, yes, but also for music, and mess, and presence. He pressed his palm against the doorway for a moment, then turned, walked down the stairs, and into the life he once kept at arm's length. That afternoon, a new rhythm unfolded. Lunch was loud, napkins unfolded, jokes told. Freddie spilled water across the table, and no one flinched. Oliver sang the wrong words to a song, and everyone laughed until they cried, even Richard. He had started to laugh again, not like a man escaping grief, but like someone who had finally made room for both joy and loss at the same table. After the dishes were cleared, he sat with Stella in the sunroom. The boys were outside with chalk, drawing suns and rockets and messy stick figures that always included her. He handed her an envelope, thicker than the last one. Inside, legal papers. At the bottom, his signature, and a line added in pen. In the event of anything unforeseen, Stella Gray is to be the children's legal guardian. She looked up at him, speechless. He didn't explain, just said quietly, "You became their safe place. Not because you were assigned, because you stayed." Her throat tightened. "Are you sure?" I've never been more certain of anything I didn't plan. That night, the boys asked her to read the bedtime story from her chair, the one beside their bunk beds. It was a story about home, about a house that stood through every kind of weather because someone inside always kept the light on. They were asleep before she reached the last page, but she read it to the end anyway. Then she sat in the silence for a moment, watching their chests rise and fall, and she whispered, "Thank you, God, for trusting me with them." Downstairs, Richard stood at the fireplace, in his hands, the last of Claire's journals. He didn't read it. He just held it, then placed it gently beside the family photo on the mantel, the one he'd finally put back. Stella's coat hung near the door now, her keys in the dish, her voice woven into the fabric of the home. He didn't know when the shift happened. He only knew that healing hadn't come like thunder. It had come in quiet, obedient steps. The next morning, the four of them walked to the hill behind the house. Freddie held the kite string. Oliver carried the tail. Stella walked beside them, one hand on Richard's arm. The wind lifted just as they reached the top. The kite rose easily this time. No stumbling, no hesitation. And the boys ran together, not away from grief but toward something lighter. Richard stood back, watching them soar, then turned to Stella. "Do you regret not going back to teaching?" She smiled. "No, I just changed classrooms." He nodded. "And me?" Her voice was soft. "You didn't need a teacher. You needed someone to remind you that grief doesn't get the last word." He looked out over the hill. The kite arced higher. The boys' laughter rang out, filling the air like music. He reached into his pocket, pulled out Claire's last letter, creased from being read too many times. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Later, as the sun sank low and the sky burned soft orange, the four of them lay on a blanket watching the clouds shift like stories. Freddie rested against Stella's side, Oliver tucked into his father's chest. No words were spoken. There was no need. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was full, whole, and somewhere in the stillness it felt like Claire was smiling, not from the past, but from right there with them, in the wind, the laughter, the healing, and in the family they chose to become.